That single sentence carries more weight than most people will ever understand. It carries the shame of a woman who walked into a celebration and left as a ghost. It carries years of silence, of wondering, of what-ifs that echo through empty rooms at 3 a.m. And it carries a secret that neither she nor anyone else could have predicted, a secret that would eventually bring two worlds crashing back together in the most unexpected way. Her name was Elena Vasquez, and on September 14, 2012, she attended a wedding in Chicago that would change the trajectory of her entire life. She was 23 years old, working double shifts at a laundromat on the South Side, sending half her paycheck to her mother in a small town outside of Albuquerque. She owned exactly 2 nice dresses, and on that particular Saturday, she wore the better one, a simple navy blue dress she had found at a thrift store on Halsted Street, carefully mended at the hem where the previous owner had let it drag too long on the ground. The wedding was for her cousin Maria, who was marrying into a family Eleanor had never met before, the Benedetti family. Old money, or so everyone said. Eleanor did not know much about them, only that they lived in a massive house in Lincoln Park, and that Maria had met their youngest son, Vincent, at a charity gala 2 years prior. Maria had always been the golden child of the family, beautiful, educated, destined for better things. Eleanor had accepted this reality long ago, the same way she had accepted that her own path would be quieter, harder, and far less glamorous. What Elena did not accept, what she could never have prepared herself for, was what would happen when she walked through the doors of the Benedetti estate that afternoon. The estate itself was something out of a film. Iron gates that stretched toward the sky, a driveway lined with perfectly trimmed hedges, a fountain in the center of the courtyard, water cascading over, marble sculptures of angels with their hands raised toward the heavens. Elena remembered standing at the base of that fountain, staring up at it, feeling as though she had accidentally wandered onto a movie set. She did not belong here. She knew that. She could feel it in the way the valet looked at her when she stepped out of her borrowed car, a rusted Honda Civic that belonged to her roommate. She could feel it in the way the other guests glanced at her dress, at her shoes, at the small clutch, purse she had borrowed from a co-worker because her own purse had a broken zipper. Every detail of her poverty was on display, and she felt each judgment like a small needle pressing into her skin. But she was here for Maria. Maria had specifically asked her to come. And despite everything, despite the distance that had grown between them over the years, Eleanor still loved her cousin. She still remembered the summers they had spent together as children, catching fireflies in mason jars and dreaming about the lives they would one day lead. Maria's dreams had come true, Eleanor's had not, but that did not mean she could not celebrate her cousin's happiness. The ceremony was held in the gardens behind the estate, white chairs arranged in perfect rows, an arch draped in roses and peonies, a string quartet playing Pachelbel as the guests took their seats. Eleanor found a spot in the back, near a large oak tree that provided some shade from the September sun. She watched as Vincent Benedetti took his place at the altar, his brothers standing beside him in matching black suits. Vincent was handsome in that polished, untouchable way that wealthy men often are. Dark hair slicked back, strong jaw, eyes that seemed to take in everything without revealing anything in return. He smiled as Maria walked down the aisle, but Eleanor noticed something in that smile, something she could not quite name. It was not the smile of a man overwhelmed by love. It was the smile of a man who had everything figured out, who had already calculated every possible outcome and found them all acceptable. Years later, Eleanor would think back to that moment and wonder if she had sensed something even then, some instinct buried deep beneath the surface, warning her that this family was not what they appeared to be. But on that day she pushed the thought aside. She clapped when they exchanged vows. She wiped a tear from her eye when Maria laughed at something Vincent whispered in her ear. She followed the crowd into the grand ballroom for the reception, marveling at the crystal chandeliers and the ice sculptures and the tables overflowing with food she had never seen before. Oysters on beds of crushed ice, towers of shrimp, cuts of beef that probably cost more than her monthly rent. She found her table near the back of the room, tucked away in a corner where the lighting was dim, and the noise from the dance floor was muffled. The seating arrangement had been carefully orchestrated, and Elena understood immediately where she ranked in the hierarchy of guests. Her table was occupied by distant relatives and family friends who had been invited out of obligation rather than affection. An elderly aunt who smelled of mothballs, a second cousin she had not seen since childhood, a few people she did not recognize at all. She was halfway through her salad when she heard the voice. "Excuse me, is this seat taken?" Elena looked up and found herself staring at a man she had never seen before. He was tall, with broad shoulders and dark hair that fell across his forehead in a way that seemed almost deliberately careless. His suit was well fitted but not flashy, the kind of suit a man wears when he wants to blend in rather than stand out. But his eyes were what caught her attention. They were deep brown, almost black, and they held a warmth that seemed out of place in this cold, glittering ballroom. "No," Elena said, gesturing to the empty chair beside her. "Please." The man sat down, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Elena returned her attention to her salad, acutely aware of his presence beside her. She could smell his cologne, something woodsy and clean, and she found herself wondering who he was and why he had chosen to sit at this particular table, in this particular seat, next to her. "I'm Marcus," he said finally, extending his hand. "Elena." She shook it, noting the calluses on his palm. Working hands. The hands of someone who did not spend their days behind a desk or at country club lunches. "You're related to the bride?" he asked. "Cousin on her mother's side." "And what do you do, Elena?" She hesitated. This was always the question she dreaded, the one that exposed her for what she was, a girl from a poor family, working a job that paid barely enough to cover her bills. In rooms like this, surrounded by people who probably spent more on a single dinner than she earned in a month, the answer to that question felt like a confession. "I work at a laundromat," she said finally, meeting his eyes. "On the south side." She waited for the reaction, the subtle shift in expression, the polite disengagement that always followed. But Marcus just nodded, as if she had told him she was a doctor or a lawyer or anything else that might be considered acceptable. "That's honest work," he said. "More honest than a lot of what goes on in rooms like this." Elena felt something loosen in her chest, a knot she had not realized she was carrying. She smiled genuinely for the first time since she had arrived. "What about you?" she asked. "What do you do?" Marcus seemed to consider the question carefully. "I work for the Benedetti family," he said, "in a consulting capacity." "Consulting?" "Something like that." He smiled, but there was something guarded in that smile, something that suggested he was not telling her the whole truth. Elena did not press. She understood secrets. She had a few of her own. They talked for the rest of the dinner, about books they had read and films they had seen, about their childhoods, his in Brooklyn, hers in New Mexico, about their dreams for the future, the places they wanted to visit, the lives they imagined for themselves. Marcus was easy to talk to in a way that surprised her. He listened when she spoke. He laughed at her jokes. He did not make her feel small or insignificant or out of place. By the time the dancing started, Elena had almost forgotten where she was. She had almost forgotten that she did not belong here, that she was an outsider in a world of wealth and privilege. Marcus made her feel seen, valued, important. "Would you like to dance?" he asked, standing and offering his hand. Elena looked at his outstretched palm, then at the dance floor, where couples were swaying beneath the chandelier's glow. She thought about her thrift store dress and her borrowed shoes, and all the eyes that would be watching, judging, calculating her worth. "I would love to," she said. They danced for 2 songs. Elena could feel the stares of the other guests, could hear the whispered comments and muffled laughter. But Marcus held her close, his hand warm against the small of her back, and she let herself disappear into the music. For those few minutes nothing else mattered, not her poverty, not her borrowed clothes, not the judgment of strangers who knew nothing about her life or her struggles or her dreams. It was the happiest she had felt in years. And then, just as the second song was ending, a voice cut through the moment like a blade. "Marcus, what on earth are you doing?" Eleanor turned to find a woman standing at the edge of the dance floor. She was tall and slender, with silver hair swept back from a face that might have been beautiful if not for the coldness in her eyes. She wore a gown of deep burgundy, diamonds glittering at her throat and ears, and she looked at Elena the way one might look at a stain on an expensive carpet. "Mrs. Benedetti," Marcus said, his voice carefully neutral. I can see what you were doing." The woman's gaze swept over Elena, taking in every detail of her appearance with undisguised contempt. "Dancing with the help, apparently." The words landed like a slap. Elena felt the blood rush to her face, felt the hot sting of humiliation spreading through her chest. Around them, the other guests had stopped dancing, their attention drawn to the scene unfolding before them. "I'm not help," Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm Maria's cousin." Mrs. Benedetti's eyebrows rose slightly. "Ah, the poor relation from the southwest. Maria mentioned you might attend." She paused, her lips curling into something that was not quite a smile. I assumed she was joking. Eleanor stood frozen on the dance floor, the eyes of every guest in the ballroom fixed upon her. She could see Maria standing near the head table, her face pale with shock. She could see Vincent Benedetti, the groom, watching the scene with an expression of detached curiosity, as if this were merely entertainment. And she could see Mrs. Benedetti, Constance she would later learn her name was, staring at her with the cold satisfaction of someone who had just put a pest in its place. "I think," Constance said, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent room, "that you should leave. This is a private event for family and friends, and you, my dear, are neither." Elena opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. What could she say? How could she defend herself against someone like this, someone with money and power, and the absolute certainty that she was better than everyone around her? Eleanor had spent her entire life fighting against people like Constance Benedetti, people who measured worth in dollars and pedigrees and designer labels, and she had lost every single time. "Elena," Marcus's voice was low, urgent. "Don't listen to her. You have every right to be here. Do not presume to tell me who has rights in my own home." Constance's eyes flashed dangerously. "Marcus, you forget your place. You work for this family. You do not speak on our behalf." Something shifted in Marcus's expression, a hardness that Elena had not seen before. He straightened, his jaw tight, and for a moment she thought he might actually argue with the woman. But then, just as quickly, the tension seemed to drain from his body. He stepped back, creating distance between himself and Elena, and when he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "Of course, Mrs. Benedetti, my apologies." The betrayal was swift and total. Eleanor watched as Marcus, the man who had made her feel seen, who had made her feel valued, retreated to the sidelines like a chastened servant. He did not look at her. He did not defend her. He simply disappeared. And Elena was left standing alone in the center of the dance floor, surrounded by strangers who were staring at her as though she were an animal in a zoo. "Well," Constance said, "I believe I asked you to leave." Eleanor could feel the tears building behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of these people. She lifted her chin, squared her shoulders, and walked toward the exit with as much dignity as she could muster. She was halfway across the ballroom when she heard the laughter. It started low, a single snicker from somewhere to her left, and then it spread, rippling through the crowd like a wave. By the time Elena reached the door, the entire room seemed to be laughing, at her dress, at her shoes, at the audacity of a poor girl from New Mexico who had dared to imagine she might belong in a place like this. Eleanor pushed through the doors and stumbled into the cool September night. She walked past the fountain with its marble angels, past the perfectly trimmed hedges, past the iron gates that seemed to close behind her like the doors of a prison. She did not stop walking until she reached her borrowed car, parked 3 blocks away, because the valet had taken one look at it and suggested she find her own spot. She sat in the driver's seat for a long time, staring at the steering wheel, trying to process what had just happened. The humiliation was overwhelming, a physical weight pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. She had been publicly shamed, mocked, dismissed, and the worst part was that some small, treacherous part of her believed she deserved it. She had known she did not belong. She had known she was out of her depth, and she had gone anyway, foolishly hoping that things might be different. Elena started the car and drove back to her apartment on the south side. She did not cry. Not yet. The tears would come later, in the privacy of her tiny bedroom, where no one could see her weakness. But as she drove through the empty streets of Chicago, Elena made herself a promise. She would never let anyone make her feel that small again. She would work harder, save more, build a life that no one could take from her. And if she ever saw Constance Benedetti or any of those laughing guests again, they would find a very different woman standing before them. It was a promise she would keep for 11 years. In the weeks that followed the wedding, Elena threw herself into her work with a ferocity that surprised even herself. She picked up extra shifts at the laundromat, working from dawn until well past midnight. She saved every penny she could, cutting back on food and heat and anything else that was not absolutely essential. She was determined to build something, to prove to herself, if no one else, that she was worth more than the sum of her borrowed clothes and her modest bank account. But the wound from that night refused to heal. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Constance Benedetti's contemptuous smile. Every time she walked past a mirror, she saw the reflection of a woman who had been publicly humiliated. The memory was a splinter buried deep beneath her skin, too small to remove, but too painful to ignore. She did not hear from Marcus again. She had not expected to. Whatever connection they had shared on that dance floor had been severed the moment he stepped away from her, choosing his loyalty to the Benedetti family over any feelings he might have had. Elena told herself it did not matter. He was just a man she had known for a few hours, a stranger who had offered her a brief moment of kindness in a hostile world. But sometimes, late at night, she would lie in her narrow bed and wonder what might have happened if things had been different. If Constance had not interrupted them, if Marcus had stood by her side instead of retreating into the shadows. Would they have exchanged numbers, gone out for coffee, built something together? It was a dangerous game playing what if. Elena learned quickly to stop. The past could not be changed. The only thing she could control was her future. Her cousin Maria called once, about a week after the wedding. Elena let it go, to voicemail. She listened to the message 3 times, Maria's voice apologetic and uncomfortable, offering excuses that rang hollow and empty. Elena, I'm so sorry about what happened. Mrs. Benedetti is just... She's very particular. I should have warned you. I should have prepared you. Please call me back. I want to make this right. Elena deleted the message. There was nothing to make right. Maria had stood there and watched while Elena was humiliated, and she had done nothing, said nothing. Their relationship, already strained by years of growing apart, had finally reached its breaking point. Over the next few months, Elena began to build a new life for herself. She enrolled in night classes at the local community college, studying business administration. She used the computer at the public library to research small business loans and entrepreneurship programs. She read every book she could find about starting a company, managing finances, building a brand. And then, one gray afternoon in February, she walked into a small bank on Michigan Avenue and applied for a loan to open her own dry cleaning business. The loan officer was a middle-aged man with thinning hair and skeptical eyes. He looked at Elena's application, at her modest savings, at her complete lack of business experience, and he laughed. "Miss Vasquez," he said, leaning back in his chair, "I admire your ambition, but dry cleaning is a competitive industry. You have no collateral, no track record, and, frankly, the numbers just don't support the risk." Elena felt the familiar sting of rejection, the same sensation she had felt standing on that dance floor while the guests laughed. But this time, she did not retreat. She did not run. "I understand your concerns," she said, keeping her voice steady, "but I've done my research. There's a gap in the market on the south side. Quality dry cleaning services at affordable prices. I've identified a location, drafted a business plan, and projected. Revenues for the first 3 years. All I'm asking for is a chance. The loan officer sighed. Look, I'm sure you've worked very hard, but this institution has standards. We can't just give money to anyone who walks in with a dream. Anyone who walks in with a dream. The words echoed in Elena's mind long after she left the bank, rejected and humiliated once again. She walked home through the February slush, her hands stuffed in the pockets of her thin coat, wondering if she was foolish to believe she could ever be anything more than what the world had already decided she was. But Elena did not give up. Over the next 2 years, she applied for 17 different loans from 12 different institutions. She was rejected every single time. Too much risk, not enough collateral, no proven track record. The excuses varied, but the message was always the same. People like her did not get to build things. People like her were meant to work for others, to serve and struggle and accept whatever crumbs life happened to throw their way. And then, in the spring of 2015, something unexpected happened. Eleanor was working her usual shift at the laundromat when an elderly woman walked in, struggling to carry a large bag of clothing. Eleanor rushed over to help, taking the bag from the woman's trembling hands and guiding her to a seat near the window. "Thank you, dear," the woman said, catching her breath. "I'm not as strong as I used to be." "It's no trouble," Eleanor replied, sorting the clothes for washing. "You just sit there and rest. I'll take care of everything." They began to talk. The woman's name was Margaret Chen, and she had owned a small tailoring shop in Chinatown for over 40 years. Her husband had passed away the previous winter, and now at 83 she was finding it increasingly difficult to manage the business alone. "My children want me to sell," Margaret said, her voice tinged with sadness. "They say it's too much for me. And maybe they're right. But that shop, it was our dream, Henry's and mine. We built it from nothing. I can't just let it go to some stranger who won't care about it the way we did." Eleanor listened quietly, folding the woman's clothes with practiced efficiency. There was something in Margaret's story that resonated with her. The struggle, the determination, the refusal to give up on a dream, even when everyone else said it was impossible. "What if," Elena said slowly, "you didn't have to sell to a stranger?" Margaret looked at her curiously. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if you sold to me?" The words came out before Elena could stop them. It was impulsive, irrational, probably foolish. She had no money, no credit, no way to finance such a purchase. But something in Margaret's eyes, a flicker of hope, of recognition, made her continue. "I've been trying to start my own business for years," Elena explained. "Dry cleaning, tailoring, alterations, it's what I know. I've worked in laundromats my whole life, and I know I could make your shop successful. I would honor everything you and your husband built. I would carry on your legacy." Margaret studied her for a long moment. Then, slowly, a smile spread across her weathered face. "Tell me more," she said. Over the next several months, Eleanor and Margaret worked out an arrangement. Margaret would sell the business to Eleanor at a significantly reduced price, with payments spread out over 10 years. In exchange, Eleanor would keep the shop's original name, Chen's Fine Tailoring, and employ Margaret part-time as a consultant until she was ready to fully retire. It was not a perfect solution. Elena still had to scrape together every cent for the down payment, working 3 jobs and selling everything she owned that was not absolutely essential. But by September of 2015, 3 years after that humiliating wedding, Elena Vasquez became the owner of a small tailoring shop in the heart of Chicago's Chinatown. She renamed the business Chen and Vasquez Fine Tailoring in honor of both the original owners and her own new chapter. The first few months were brutal. Long hours, tight margins, constant worry about whether she would be able to make the next payment. But Eleanor refused to quit. She worked 16-hour days, building relationships with customers, learning the intricacies of the tailoring trade, slowly but steadily growing the business. By the end of her first year, she had broken even. By the end of her second year, she had turned a modest profit. and by the end of her third year, Chen and Vasquez had become one of the most respected tailoring establishments on the south side of Chicago. Elena hired her first employee, a young woman named Rosa, who reminded her of herself at that age. She began to dream of expansion, of opening a second location, of building something that would last beyond her own lifetime. The wound from the Benedetti wedding had not disappeared, but it had scarred over, becoming a source of strength rather than shame. Se você já passou por momento onde foi subestimado por alguém que se achava superior, escreva nos comentários: minha hora vai chegar. Vamos ver quantos guerreiros estão assistindo essa história. And then, one afternoon in the fall of 2018, Marcus Benedetti walked into her shop. Elena did not recognize him at first. 6 years had passed since that wedding, and Marcus had changed. His dark hair was shorter, his jaw more angular, his eyes carrying a weight that had not been there before. He wore a tailored grey suit that fit him perfectly, and he moved with the confidence of a man who was used to being in control. But when he spoke, Elena knew immediately who he was. "I need a suit altered," he said, placing a garment bag on the counter. "I was told this is the best place in the city." Elena stared at him, her heart pounding in her chest. 1,000 memories flooded back, the dance floor, the laughter, the moment. He had stepped away from her and let her fall. "Marcus," she said, her voice flat. He blinked, surprised. Then recognition dawned on his face, and for a moment he looked almost ashamed. "Elena, I didn't know this was your shop." "Would you have come if you did?" The question hung in the air between them, charged with 6 years of silence and unspoken regret. Marcus opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, the bell above the door chimed and another customer walked in. "We can discuss the alterations," Elena said, her professional mask sliding back into place. "Rosa, please help this gentleman while I review the specifications." She took the garment bag into the back room, her hands trembling slightly as she unzipped it. Inside was a beautifully crafted suit, charcoal grey, Italian wool, hand-stitched details. It probably cost more than her first car. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to focus. Whatever history existed between them, this was still her business. She would treat Marcus like any other customer. She would do the job, take the payment, and move on. But when Marcus appeared in the doorway of the back room, Elena knew that moving on would not be so simple. "Can we talk?" he asked. "Please." Elena continued examining the suit, not looking at him. "I'm working." "I know. I want to explain. About what happened at the wedding." "There's nothing to explain." Elena hung the suit on a nearby rack. "You made your choice. It was 6 years. Ego, it doesn't matter anymore. It matters to me." Something in his voice made her pause. She looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since he had walked in. And she saw something she had not expected to see. Pain. Genuine, undisguised pain. "5 minutes, she said finally. "That's all I can give you." Marcus nodded, relief flooding his features. He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him, and for a moment they stood in silence, 2 people separated by years and circumstance and choices that could not be undone. "I was a coward," Marcus said. "That night at the wedding, when Mrs. Benedetti confronted you, I should have stood up for you. I should have told her she was wrong. Instead, I did nothing. I let you walk out of that ballroom alone, and I've regretted it every day since." Elena crossed her arms over her chest. "Why? Why did you step back?" Marcus ran a hand through his hair, looking suddenly exhausted. "Because I was afraid. The Benedettis, they're not just wealthy, they're powerful. And at that time my entire life depended on them, my career, my income, everything. I thought if I challenged Constance, if I took your side against her, I would lose everything I had worked for." "So you sacrificed me to protect yourself?" "Yes." The word came out like a confession. "And I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm just asking you to understand." Elena was quiet for a long moment. She understood more than Marcus could know. She understood, Desperation and fear and the terrible choices people make when their survival is at stake. She had made her own compromises over the years, her own moral calculations. She was not in a position to judge, but understanding was not the same as forgiveness. And 6 years of hurt could not be erased by a 5-minute conversation in the back room of a tailoring shop. "I'll have the suit ready in 3 days," Elena said finally. "You can pick it up any time after noon." Marcus nodded, accepting her. Dismissal. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "For what it's worth," he said, "I've kept track of you over the years. I knew when you opened this shop, I knew when you started to succeed, and I've been proud of you, even though I had no right to be." He left before Elena could respond. She stood alone in the back room, surrounded by fabric and thread and the quiet hum of her own business, and she wondered if the past could ever truly be left behind. Marcus returned 3 days later to pick up his suit. He paid in cash, tipped generously, and thanked Elena with a formality that felt almost painful. She expected that to be the end of it, another brief encounter with her past before she returned to the life she had built for herself. But Marcus came back the following week with another suit that needed alterations, and the week after that with a coat that needed repairing, and the week after that with shirts that needed new buttons. "You're running out of clothes to bring me," Eleanor said during his 4th visit, a hint of amusement creeping into her voice despite herself. "I'm a clumsy dresser," Marcus replied, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Always ripping things, losing buttons. It's a real problem." Eleanor shook her head, but she was smiling too. Against her better judgment, she was beginning to enjoy his visits. Their conversations had evolved beyond the transactional, discussions about fabrics and pricing giving way to stories about their lives, their work, their hopes for the future. She learned that Marcus had risen through the ranks of the Benedetti organization over the past 6 years, becoming one of the family's most trusted advisors. The work was demanding and often morally ambiguous, but it had allowed him to build a substantial fortune of his own. She learned that Vincent Benedetti, the groom from that long-ago wedding, had taken over as head of the family after his father's death in 2015. The transition had been turbulent, marked by internal conflicts and power struggles that Marcus did not fully explain, but Vincent had emerged victorious, consolidating control over the family's various business interests and expanding their influence across the city. She learned, too, that Maria and Vincent's marriage had not been a happy one. They had divorced after just 4 years, with Maria returning to New Mexico and rarely speaking to anyone from the Benedetti family again. Elena felt a complicated mix of emotions when she heard this news, sadness for her cousin, but also a certain grim satisfaction that the golden child's fairy tale had not turned out so perfectly after all. What Marcus did not tell her, what Elena would not learn until much later, was the true nature of the Benedetti family's business. She had her suspicions, of course. No legitimate enterprise required the kind of secrecy and caution that surrounded the Benedettis. But she did not ask, and Marcus did not volunteer the information. Some truths were better left unspoken. Months passed, and Marcus's visits became a regular part of Elena's routine. They developed a friendship of sorts, careful and guarded, built on a foundation of mutual respect and shared regret. Elena found herself looking forward to seeing him, anticipating their conversations with a warmth that surprised her. And then, one evening in early spring, Marcus asked her to dinner. "Not as a customer," he said quickly, seeing the hesitation in her eyes. "Just as someone who enjoys your company, someone who would like to get to know you better." Eleanor considered the invitation carefully. She was 30 years old, successful by any reasonable measure, and she had spent the past 6 years focused entirely on her business. She had not dated, had not allowed herself the vulnerability that romantic relationships required. The memory of that wedding, of being judged and found wanting, had made her cautious about opening herself up to anyone. But Marcus was different. He had seen her at her lowest, had witnessed her humiliation, and he was still here, still asking, still interested in the woman she had become, rather than the poor girl she had once been. "One dinner," she said. "That's all I'm promising. One dinner turned into two. Two dinners turned into weekly outings, restaurants and museums, and long walks through the city that had become her home. Elena felt herself softening, the walls she had built around her heart beginning to crumble. Marcus was attentive and thoughtful, remembering details she had mentioned in passing, surprising her with small gifts that showed he had been listening. He seemed genuinely interested in her work, asking questions about the business and offering suggestions that were actually helpful. And when they were together, he made her feel seen in a way she had not felt since that night on the dance floor, before everything fell apart. But Elena could not fully relax. There were moments when Marcus's phone would ring, and he would step away to take the call, his voice dropping to a murmur she could not quite hear. There were evenings when he would cancel their plans at the last minute, offering vague apologies about work emergencies that required his immediate attention. There were shadows in his eyes that appeared without warning, suggesting depths of experience he was not ready to share. She knew he was keeping things from her. She just did not know what, or why, or whether she was prepared to face the truth when it finally emerged. The answer came on a warm evening in June, almost a year after Marcus had first walked back into her life. They were having dinner at a small Italian restaurant on the near west side, a cozy place with checkered tablecloths and candles flickering in wine bottles. Elena was telling a story about a difficult customer when she noticed Marcus's attention shift to something over her shoulder. His expression changed, a subtle tightening of his jaw, a hardness creeping into his eyes. "We need to leave," he said quietly. "What?" "We just ordered." "Now." The urgency in his voice left no room for argument. Elena grabbed her purse, her heart racing, and followed Marcus toward the back of the restaurant. They had just reached the kitchen doors when two men appeared at the front entrance, scanning the room with cold, professional eyes. Marcus pushed through the kitchen, pulling Elena behind him. They wove through startled cooks and steaming pots, burst out the back door into an alley and ran. They did not stop until they reached Marcus's car, parked several blocks away. He unlocked the doors with shaking hands, practically pushing Elena into the passenger seat before jumping behind the wheel and peeling out into traffic. "What is happening?" Elena demanded, her voice trembling. "Who were those men?" Marcus did not answer immediately. He was checking the rearview mirror, taking turns at random, making sure they were not being followed. Only when he was satisfied that they had escaped did he finally speak. "I should have told you a long time ago," he said. "The Benedetti family. They're not just business people. I know what they are." Eleanor's voice was flat. "I've always known. You think I'm stupid?" Marcus glanced at her, surprised. "Then why did you—" "Because you didn't ask me to be part of it. You kept that world separate from me. And I thought maybe I could pretend it didn't exist." The car fell silent. Eleanor stared out the window at the passing streetlights, trying to process what had just happened. She had known, on some level, what Marcus was involved in, but knowing abstractly and experiencing it firsthand were two very different things. "Those men," Marcus said finally, "they work for a rival family, the Castellanis. There's been tension for months, disputes over territory, business arrangements gone wrong. Vincent has been trying to negotiate a truce, but—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "But what?" "But some people don't want peace. Some people would rather go to war." Elena absorbed this information, feeling as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet. This was not a world she understood, not a world she had ever wanted any part of, and yet here she was, sitting in a car with a man who lived in that world every day. "I'm sorry," Marcus said. "I never meant to put you in danger. I thought I could keep these two parts of my life separate. I thought I could protect you. By lying to me. By omitting certain truths." He pulled the car to a stop at a red light and turned to face her. "Elena, what I feel for you is real. Everything between us has been real. The only thing I've hidden is the ugliness of my work, and I've hidden it because I didn't want to lose you." Elena looked at him, at his earnest expression, his pleading eyes, the vulnerability he so rarely showed. She thought about the past year, the connection they had built, the way he made her feel valued and appreciated and worthy of love. And then she thought about those two men in the restaurant, their cold eyes sweeping the room, searching for prey. "I need time," she said, "to think about all of this." Marcus nodded slowly. "I understand." He drove her home in silence, walking her to her door and waiting until she was safely inside before returning to his car. Eleanor watched him through the window, his figure silhouetted against the streetlights, and she wondered if the life she had built was strong enough to withstand the storm she could feel gathering on the horizon. Elena did not see Marcus for 3 weeks after that night. She threw herself into her work, staying at the shop until long past midnight, losing herself in the simple satisfaction of fabric and thread and perfectly executed alterations. But no matter how hard she tried, she could not stop thinking about him, about the danger he lived with every day, about the choices he had made and the compromises he continued to make, and despite everything, about how much she missed him. She was closing the shop on a Thursday evening when her phone buzzed with a text message. 3 words from an unknown number. "We need to talk." Her heart pounded as she typed back, "Where?" The response came immediately. "Grant Park. The Fountain. 1 hour." Elena arrived at Buckingham Fountain just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the plaza. The fountain's water jets were illuminated from below, creating a spectacular display of light and motion that drew tourists and locals alike. She found a bench near the edge of the crowd and waited. Marcus appeared 10 minutes later, looking more haggard than she had ever seen him. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his suit was rumpled as if he had slept in it. "Thank you for coming," he said, sitting beside her. "Your message didn't exactly leave room for refusal." "I know. I'm sorry. But there are things you need to know, things that are going to affect you whether you want them to or not." Eleanor felt a chill run down her spine. "What kind of things?" Marcus took a deep breath. "Vincent Benedetti knows about us, about you, and he's not happy. Why would Vincent care about me? Because of what I am to him, because of the position I hold in his organization." Marcus paused, choosing his words carefully. "I'm not just an advisor, Elena. I'm his consigliere, his second in command. And in our world, personal relationships are complicated." Elena stared at him, trying to absorb what he was telling her. "You're saying Vincent sees me as a threat?" "I'm saying Vincent sees everything as either a potential asset or a potential liability, and right now he's not sure which category you fall into." "So what does that mean? Is he going to—" "What? Come after me? Come after my business?" "I don't know." Marcus's voice was raw with frustration. "That's what I'm trying to figure out. I've been working to convince him that you're not a risk, that our relationship is strictly personal and has nothing to do with family business. But Vincent is paranoid. He trusts no one completely. Not even me." Elena sat back, her mind racing. She had spent years building her life, her business, her sense of self. She had worked and sacrificed and overcome every obstacle that stood in her path. And now, because of a man she had fallen for, all of it was potentially at risk. "I should walk away," she said quietly. "From you. From all of this." Marcus did not disagree. "That might be the smartest thing to do. But I don't want you to." He reached out, taking her hand in his. "I know that's selfish. I know I have no right to ask anything of you. But Elena, you're the only good thing in my life, the only thing that makes any of this bearable. And if I lose you—" He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. Elena could see the desperation in his eyes, could feel the tremor in his grip. Despite everything, despite the danger and the secrets and the impossible situation they found themselves in, she could not bring herself to let go. "I'm not going anywhere," she said finally. "But Marcus, if we're going to do this, if we're going to be together, then there can't be any more lies between us. I need to know everything, the good, the bad, all of it." Marcus nodded slowly. That's fair. And you need to find a way to make this work with Vincent. I don't know how, but you need to figure it out. Because I'm not going to spend my life looking over my shoulder, waiting for someone to come after me. I will, Marcus promised. I swear to you I will make this right. They sat together in the gathering darkness, the fountain's lights dancing on the water before them. Elena did not know what the future held. She did not know if Marcus could keep his promise, or if Vincent Benedetti would decide she was more trouble than she was worth. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was done running, done hiding, done letting fear dictate her choices. Whatever came next, she would face it head on. The following months were a delicate balancing act. Marcus worked to smooth things over with Vincent, positioning Elena as a harmless civilian who had no interest in or knowledge of family business. Elena, for her part, kept her head down and focused on her shop, avoiding any situations that might draw unwanted attention. But tension continued to build in the wider world of Chicago's underworld. The conflict with the Castellani family escalated, with incidents of violence that made the evening news: shootings, car bombs, mysterious disappearances. The city's police department launched a major investigation, promising to crack down on organized criminal activity. And through it all, the Benedetti family tightened their grip on their territory, preparing for a war that seemed increasingly inevitable. Elena learned to live with the uncertainty. She learned to recognize the signs when Marcus was under particular stress: the tightness in his shoulders, the distracted look in his eyes, the way he would sometimes fall silent mid-conversation, lost in thoughts he could not share. She learned to give him space when he needed it, and comfort when he asked for it. And she learned to trust that, despite everything, he would always come back to her. In January of 2020, Marcus proposed. It happened on a quiet Sunday morning in Elena's small apartment above the shop. They had been together for almost 2 years by then, surviving countless challenges and emerging stronger each time. Marcus had been unusually quiet all weekend, and Elena had assumed he was worried about work. She did not expect him to get down on one knee beside her bed, producing a small velvet box from his pocket. "I've spent my whole life in the shadows," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Doing things I'm not proud of, making choices I can't take back. But when I'm with you, Elena, I feel like I can be better, like I can be the man you deserve." He opened the box, revealing a simple diamond ring that caught the morning light. "I know I'm not perfect. I know this life is complicated and dangerous, and probably not what you dreamed of when you were young. But I love you, more than I've ever loved anything. And I want to spend the rest of my life proving that to you." Elena looked at the ring, then at Marcus, then at the ring again. She thought about everything they had been through: the wedding where they first met, the years of separation, the slow rebuilding of trust and connection. She thought about the risks and the unknowns and the shadows that would always lurk at the edges of their lives. And then she thought about what her life would be without him. Empty. Safe, perhaps, but empty. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you." They held each other in the golden morning light, two people who had found something precious in the most unlikely of circumstances. For that moment, at least, the darkness seemed very far away. The engagement was kept quiet. Marcus wanted to wait until the situation with the Castellanis was resolved before making any public announcements. Elena understood. Drawing attention to their relationship could put a target on both their backs. So they continued as they had been, stealing moments of happiness wherever they could find them. But the universe, it seemed, had other plans. In March of 2020, the world changed. A pandemic swept across the globe, forcing businesses to close and people to isolate in their homes. Elena's shop, deemed non-essential, was shut down for months. The income she had worked so hard to build evaporated overnight. And Marcus, unable to visit without risking exposure, was reduced to nightly phone calls and occasional video chats. It was a difficult time. Eleanor watched her savings dwindle, applied for every government assistance program she could find, and tried to keep her spirits up despite the crushing uncertainty. She learned to sew masks and protective gear, pivoting her business to meet the new demand. And she waited, counting the days until she could see Marcus again. When they finally reunited in June, it was as if a weight had been lifted from both their shoulders. They held each other for a long time, not speaking, just breathing in each other's presence. "I never want to be apart from you again," Marcus murmured into her hair. "Then don't," Elena replied. "Whatever happens, don't." The pandemic raged on through the rest of the year, claiming lives and livelihoods with indiscriminate cruelty. But Elena and Marcus weathered the storm together, finding strength in their partnership. They talked about the future, about the wedding they would eventually have, about the children they might raise, about the life they wanted to build together. And they talked too about Marcus's work, about the possibility of leaving the Benedetti organization, about starting fresh somewhere far from Chicago, where the shadows of the past could not follow them. "Vincent would never allow it," Marcus said one night, his voice heavy. "I know too much. I've seen too much. The only way out of this life is—" He did not finish the sentence, but Elena understood. The only way out was death. And that was a price neither of them was willing to pay. So they stayed. They adapted. They learned to live with the compromises and the dangers and the constant nagging fear that one day their luck would run out. But they also found joy. In quiet dinners and lazy Sunday mornings, in long conversations and comfortable silences, in the simple, profound miracle of two people who had found each other against all odds and refused to let go. By the spring of 2023, 11 years had passed since the wedding that had set everything in motion. Elena was 34 years old, the owner of a thriving tailoring business with 2 locations and a staff of 7. She and Marcus had been together for 5 years, engaged for 3, still waiting for the right moment to make their relationship official. That moment came in April, though not in the way either of them had imagined. Eleanor was at her shop working late on a complicated alteration for a wealthy client when her phone rang. The caller ID showed Marcus's number, but the voice on the other end was not his. "Miss Vasquez?" A man's voice, cold and professional. "My name is Detective Williams, Chicago Police Department. I'm calling about Marcus Benedetti." Eleanor's blood ran cold. "What happened? Is he okay?" "Miss Vasquez, I need you to come down to Northwestern Memorial Hospital. Mr. Benedetti has been in an accident. His condition is critical." The phone slipped from Elena's fingers. She did not remember the drive to the hospital, or the frantic conversation with the nurse at the front desk, or the long walk down, fluorescent-lit corridors that seemed to stretch on forever. She only remembered the moment she saw Marcus, lying in a hospital bed, his face pale and bruised, tubes and wires connecting him to machines that beeped and hummed with mechanical indifference. He was alive, barely. The story emerged in fragments over the following days. Marcus had been meeting with representatives from the Castellani family, negotiating a tentative peace agreement that could end years of conflict. But someone, a faction within the Castellani organization that opposed the deal, had arranged an ambush. Marcus's car had been forced off the road and into a concrete barrier. 2 of his security team had been killed instantly. Marcus had survived, but just barely. Eleanor stayed by his bedside for 3 days, leaving only when the nurses forced her to go home and rest. She held his hand, talked to him even when he was too sedated to hear, prayed to a God she was not sure she believed in. On the 4th day, Marcus opened his eyes. "Eleanor," he whispered, his voice ragged. "You're here." "Of course I'm here." Tears streamed down her face. "Where else would I be?" He squeezed her hand weakly. I thought I was going to die, and all I could think about was you, about everything I never got to tell you." "You can tell me now," Eleanor said. "You have plenty of time." Marcus managed a faint smile. "Marry me, not someday, not when the timing is right. Now, as soon as I can stand up. I don't want to waste another minute." Elena laughed through her tears. You already proposed, remember I already said yes. Then let's stop waiting. Life is too short, Elena. This—" He gestured weakly at the hospital room around them. "This proved that. I don't want to spend whatever time I have left being cautious. I want to spend it living." Eleanor looked at him. This man who had walked into her life at the worst possible moment and somehow stayed. This man who had seen her at her lowest and helped her rise higher than she ever dreamed. This man who loved her, truly and completely, despite all the complications and dangers that came with that love. "Okay," she said. "Let's stop waiting." They were married 6 weeks later, in a small civil ceremony at the county clerk's office. Elena wore a simple white dress she had altered herself. Marcus, still recovering from his injuries, leaned on a cane, but insisted on standing unaided for the vows. The only witnesses were Margaret Chen, now 94, but still sharp as ever, and Rosa, who had become like a sister to Eleanor over the years. It was not the grand wedding Eleanor had once imagined. There were no crystal chandeliers or ice sculptures or guests in designer gowns. But as she stood before the justice of the peace, holding Marcus's hand and pledging her life to his, Elena felt something she had not expected to feel. Joy. Pure, uncomplicated joy. And in that moment, the memory of the Benedetti wedding, the humiliation, the laughter, the cold contempt of a woman who had decided Elena was worthless, felt very far away. A chapter from another life, lived by another person, in a world that no longer held any power over her. The reception was held at Chen and Vasquez, the shop that had become the foundation of Elena's new life. Tables were pushed aside to create a dance floor, and a small band played soft jazz as the guests mingled and celebrated. The guest list was modest: friends and employees, a few loyal customers, people who had become family over the years. Elena was dancing with Marcus, her head resting on his shoulder, when the front door opened and a figure stepped inside. She recognized him immediately. Vincent Benedetti, the groom from 11 years ago. The head of the family that had shaped so much of her life without her even knowing it. He had aged in the years since she had last seen him. His dark hair was streaked with grey, and lines had formed around his eyes and mouth. But he still moved with that same controlled confidence, that same sense of power barely contained beneath a civilized surface. The music stopped. Conversations died. Every eye in the room turned toward the newcomer. Marcus stiffened beside Elena. "Vincent, I didn't expect—" "I know." Vincent held up a hand. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I came to offer my congratulations, and to speak with your wife." Eleanor felt a chill run down her spine. "Me? What do you want with me?" Vincent walked toward them, his footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. He stopped a few feet away, studying Elena with an expression she could not quite read. "I owe you an apology," he said, "for what happened at my wedding, for the way my mother treated you." Elena blinked, caught off guard. "That was 11 years ago." "Yes, and I should have apologized 11 years ago. But I was young and arrogant and too concerned with appearances to do the right thing." Vincent paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. "My mother passed away last winter, peacefully in her sleep, and in the month since I've been re-evaluating the choices I've made, the person I've become." He reached into his pocket and produced an envelope, which he held out to Eleanor. "This is a gift for your wedding, and as a small token of my regret for the way you were treated." Elena took the envelope hesitantly. Inside was a check. She glanced at the amount and felt her breath catch in her throat. "I can't accept this," she said. "Please." Vincent's voice was softer now, almost pleading. "Let me do this one small thing. It won't erase the past and it won't fix the damage that was done. But maybe it can be a start." Elena looked at Marcus, who nodded slightly. Then she looked back at Vincent, at this man who had stood by while she was humiliated, who had watched the whole scene unfold with detached amusement, who had never once raised his voice in her defense. "A start," she repeated. "Yes, Maybe it can be. She tucked the envelope into her pocket, accepting the gesture for what it was. Not forgiveness, not absolution, but an acknowledgement that the past had happened, that mistakes had been made, and that there was still time, however little, to try to make amends. Vincent nodded once, then turned and walked back toward the door. He paused at the threshold, looking back over his shoulder. "Marcus," he said, "you chose well. Hold on to her." And then he was gone, disappearing into the evening as suddenly as he had arrived. The music resumed. The conversation started up again. Life, as it always did, continued, but Eleanor stood frozen for a moment longer, the weight of the envelope pressing against her hip, thinking about the strange and winding path that had brought her here. The poverty of her childhood, the humiliation of that wedding, the years of struggle and sacrifice, the unexpected love that had found her when she least expected it. She had been despised for being poor. She had vanished from a world that had made it clear she did not belong. And she had built, through sheer determination and will, a life that no one could take from her. And now, standing in her own shop, surrounded by people who loved her, married to a man who saw her worth even when the rest of the world did not, Elena finally understood something she had been too hurt to see for over a decade. The wedding that had destroyed her had also set her free. The shame that had driven her had also made her strong. The woman who had walked out of that ballroom in tears had become someone extraordinary, not in spite of what happened, but because of it. She turned to Marcus, who was watching her with concern in his eyes. "Are you okay?" he asked. Eleanor smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that lit up her entire face. "I'm better than okay," she said. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." They danced together as the evening wore on, holding each other close, two people who had found their way through darkness into light. And, somewhere in the back of Elena's mind, a voice whispered a truth she would carry with her for the rest of her days. Being despised for being poor at a wedding had nearly broken her. But vanishing, rebuilding, becoming, had made her whole. And that was a victory no one could ever take away. The months following the wedding were the happiest of Elena's life. She and Marcus settled into a comfortable rhythm, dividing their time between her apartment above the shop and a small house he had purchased, in a quiet neighborhood on the north side. They talked about the future, about expanding the business, about starting a family, about the life they were finally free to build together. But Eleanor knew, even in those joyful moments, that their peace was fragile. Marcus still worked for the Benedetti family. Vincent's apology had been genuine, but it had not changed the fundamental nature of their business or the dangers that surrounded it. And the conflict with the Castellanis, though quieter since the failed ambush, had not been resolved. The truth of this became clear in September of 2023, 5 months after the wedding. Elena was at the shop, reviewing inventory with Rosa, when 3 men walked through the door. They were dressed in expensive suits, their faces hard and unreadable, and they moved with the controlled precision of professionals. "We're looking for Marcus Benedetti's wife," one of them said. "Are you Elena?" Elena's heart began to race, but she kept her voice steady. "I am. Who are you?" "Friends of the Castellani family. We'd like to have a conversation with you." Rosa stepped forward protectively. "She's not going anywhere with you." The lead man smiled, a thin, humorless expression that did not reach his eyes. "We're not here to hurt anyone. We just want to talk about your husband, about certain business arrangements that have not been honored." "I don't know anything about my husband's business," Eleanor said. "Maybe not, but your leverage, and leverage is useful." The man pulled back his jacket slightly, revealing the holster at his hip. "Please don't make this difficult." Elena's mind raced through her options. She could try to run, but the shop had only one exit, and these men were clearly prepared to stop her. She could call for help, but her phone was on the counter, several feet away. She could fight, but against 3 armed professionals, she would not last 30 seconds. And then, just as she was beginning to despair, the front door opened again. Marcus stood in the doorway. He was alone, unarmed, dressed in a simple grey suit, but his presence seemed to fill the room, and the three Castellani men turned toward him with expressions of wary respect. "Let her go," Marcus said calmly. "Your business is with me, not with my wife." The lead man studied him. "Mr. Benedetti, we were just coming to find you. And now you have, so let Elena go, and we can discuss whatever needs to be discussed." There was a long, tense moment of silence. Elena held her breath, watching the calculations play out across the Castellani man's face. Finally, he nodded. "Very well, but this conversation is happening now. No delays." Marcus looked at Elena, his eyes conveying a message she could not quite decipher. Then he turned back to the Castellani men. "Elena, go home. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone until I call you. Marcus, please, trust me." Elena wanted to argue, wanted to demand an explanation, wanted to stand by his side and face whatever was coming together. But she could see the determination in his eyes, the quiet certainty that he knew what he was doing. "Be careful," she said finally. Marcus nodded once, then turned and followed the Castellani men out of the shop. Elena watched them go, her heart pounding, her mind filled with questions that had no answers. She did as Marcus asked. She went home, locked the door, and waited. The hours stretched on like years. Elena paced the small living room, checked her phone every few minutes, tried and failed to distract herself with television or books or work. She thought about calling the police, but she knew that would only make things worse. This was not a world where law enforcement could help. This was a world of shadows and secrets, where problems were solved through negotiation or violence, and outsiders were not welcome. At 11 o'clock that night, her phone finally rang. "It's over," Marcus said. His voice was exhausted but relieved. "I'm coming home." "What happened? Are you okay?" "I'll explain everything when I get there. Just be ready. Things are going to change." He arrived an hour later, looking as tired as he had sounded. Eleanor met him at the door, wrapped her arms around him, held him close. "Tell me," she said. And Marcus told her everything. The Castellanis had been demanding retribution for the failed peace negotiation, the one that had nearly cost Marcus his life. They wanted money, territory, and most importantly, they wanted blood. Someone had to pay for the deaths of their men in the ambush, even though they had been the ones who orchestrated it. Vincent had refused. The demands were outrageous, designed to be rejected, an excuse to escalate the conflict. So the Castellanis had taken Elena as leverage, hoping to force Marcus, and through him, Vincent, to capitulate. But Marcus had made them a different offer, a trade, his freedom for Elena's safety. "What does that mean?" Eleanor asked, her voice trembling. "Your freedom?" "It means I'm done," Marcus said. "I'm leaving the Benedetti organization, leaving Chicago, leaving everything behind." He took her hands in his. "We're leaving, Elena, together, starting over somewhere far from here." "But Vincent, he'll never let you go. You said it yourself. You know too much." "I made a deal." Marcus's expression was complicated, relief and guilt and fear all mingled together. "In exchange for my departure, I gave Vincent information about the Castellanis, about their operations, their weaknesses, their plans, enough to end the conflict once and for all." Elena stared at him, struggling to process what he was telling her. "You betrayed them? The Castellanis?" "I chose us," Marcus said simply. "I chose our future over their wars, and Vincent agreed to let me go as long as I disappear and never come back." It was a lot to take in. Elena sat down on the couch, her mind spinning. She thought about her business, her employees, the life she had built. She thought about Margaret Chen, who had given her a chance when no one else would. She thought about Rosa, who was like a sister. She thought about the shop that bore her name, the dream she had worked so hard to achieve. And then she thought about Marcus, about the man who had loved her through everything, who had risked his life to protect her, who was now offering to give up everything he had ever known so they could be together. "Where would we go?" she asked finally. "Anywhere you want. A new city, a new country. We could start fresh, build something that belongs only to us. Marcus knelt before her, taking her hands again. I know it's a lot to ask. I know you've built something incredible here. But Eleanor, I can't stay and I can't leave without you. Eleanor looked into his eyes, those deep brown eyes that had captivated her from the first moment she saw them. She thought about everything they had been through together, everything they had overcome, and she made her decision. Okay, she said, let's go. They left Chicago 3 weeks later in the grey light of an October dawn. Eleanor had sold her share of the business to Rosa, who had proven herself more than capable of running things. She had said goodbye to Margaret Chen, who had cried and hugged her and made her promise to write. She had packed her few precious possessions, photos of her mother, the ring Marcus had given her, a small jewelry box her grandmother had left her, and closed the door on the life she had known. They drove south first, through cornfields and small towns and cities that blurred together into an endless ribbon of American landscape. They stopped in Memphis for a week, then continued on to New Orleans, where the October heat still clung to the air like a memory of summer. They talked about settling there, about opening a new shop in the French Quarter, about building a life among the jazz and the jambalaya and the lazy Mississippi afternoons. But something kept them moving, a restlessness that would not quiet, a sense that they had not yet found the place where they belonged. They crossed into Texas, spent a month in Austin, then continued west through the desert. They saw the Grand Canyon at sunset, the painted rocks of Arizona, the vast emptiness of Nevada stretching toward the horizon. And finally, in late November, they arrived in San Diego. It was there, standing on a beach at sunset, watching the Pacific waves roll in with patient, eternal rhythm, that Elena felt something shift inside her. This is it, she said. This is where we start over. Marcus put his arm around her shoulders. Are you sure? I'm sure. She turned to look at him, her eyes bright with possibility. I don't know what comes next. I don't know what kind of life we'll build here, but I know we'll build it together, and that's enough for me. Marcus pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. That's enough for me too. They found an apartment near the beach, a small place with hardwood floors and windows that let in the California light. Elena began looking for commercial space, planning a new shop that would carry the lessons of Chen and Vasquez into this new chapter of her life. Marcus took odd jobs, construction, consulting, anything that paid the bills while they established themselves. It was not easy. Starting over never is. But they had each other, and that made all the difference. In the spring of 2024, Eleanor opened her new business, Pacific Tailoring. It was smaller than her Chicago shop, more intimate, but the quality of work was every bit as high. Word spread quickly, and within months she had built a loyal clientele of locals and tourists who appreciated her attention to detail and her warm, welcoming presence. Marcus, freed from the shadows of his former life, found work as a security consultant for legitimate businesses. He used his experience to help companies protect themselves from the kind of threats he had once represented. It was redemption of a sort, taking the skills he had developed in darkness and using them in service of light. They talked about children, about the future, about all the years that stretched before them, full of possibility and promise. And they talked sometimes about the past, about the wedding that had brought them together and torn them apart, about the years of separation and the miracle of reunion, about the people they had been and the people they had become. One evening, as they sat on their small balcony watching the sun set over the Pacific, Elena asked a question she had wondered about for years. Do you ever regret it, leaving everything behind? Marcus considered the question carefully. I regret the harm I caused, he said finally. The things I did, the people I hurt. Those memories will always be with me. But leaving? He shook his head. No, because leaving brought me here, to you, to this. He gestured at the horizon, where the sky was painted in shades of orange and gold and deep, endless blue. This is the life I was always supposed to have, he said. I just had to find my way to it. Elena leaned against him, feeling the warmth of his body, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "Me too," she said. "Me too." The years that followed were good years. Not perfect, no life ever is, but rich with love and purpose and the quiet satisfactions of a life well lived. Elena's business thrived. She hired 2 employees, then 3. She earned a reputation as one of the best tailors on the West Coast, attracting clients from as far away as Los Angeles and San Francisco. She never forgot where she came from, the poverty, the struggle, the long road from that humiliating wedding to this place of security and success. Marcus found peace in his new life. The shadows of his past faded slowly, like ink washed away by rain. He never fully escaped the guilt of what he had done, but he learned to live with it, to use it as a reminder of the man he no longer wanted to be. They had a daughter in 2025, a beautiful girl they named Isabel, after Elena's mother. She had her father's dark eyes and her mother's stubborn chin, and from the moment she was born, she was the center of their universe. Elena would sometimes sit by Isabel's crib late at night watching her sleep, marveling at the miracle of her existence. This child, this perfect, innocent being, was the culmination of everything Elena had endured. Every humiliation, every struggle, every moment of doubt and despair had led here, to this quiet room, to this peaceful life, to this family that was hers and hers alone. And in those moments, Elena understood something profound about the nature of suffering and redemption. The wedding that had destroyed her had also created her. The shame that had driven her from that ballroom had set her on a path that led to this exact moment, this exact place, this exact life. Without that pain, she would never have found Marcus. Without that rejection, she would never have built her business. Without that darkness, she would never have appreciated the light. It was not that the cruelty had been worth it. It was not that she was grateful for the humiliation she had endured. But she could see now with the clarity that comes from distance and time that her suffering had not been meaningless. It had shaped her, strengthened her, prepared her for the life she was now living. And that was its own kind of victory. In the fall of 2026, Elena received an unexpected letter. It was from Vincent Benedetti, who had tracked down her address through channels she preferred not to think about. The letter was brief. Vincent informed her that Marcus's deal with the Castellanis had held. The information he provided had allowed Vincent to neutralize the threat permanently. The war was over. The Benedetti family was secure. But that was not why Vincent was writing. At the end of the letter, he included a photograph. It was a picture from his wedding 11 years ago. Elena was in the background, barely visible, standing near the fountain in the courtyard. She was looking up at the sky, her expression wistful, her borrowed dress catching the afternoon light. Beneath the photograph, Vincent had written a single sentence: "I never knew her name, but I never forgot her face." Elena studied the photograph for a long time. She remembered that moment, standing by the fountain, feeling out of place, not knowing that her life was about to change forever. She had been so young then, so uncertain, so desperate for acceptance from people who would never accept her. And now, looking back across the years, she felt nothing but compassion for that girl, compassion and pride. Because that girl, the one in the borrowed dress, the one who did not belong, had survived. She had built something beautiful from the ashes of her humiliation. She had found love and purpose and a life that was entirely her own. She had vanished from a world that despised her, and she had emerged, reborn into something better. Elena put the letter and the photograph in a drawer and did not think about them again. The past was the past. The future was hers. If you've watched until this point, it means you enjoyed this story. Leave a comment saying, "I watched until the end," so I can get to know you and see who truly enjoys the stories on this channel. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel. If stories of resilience, of people who turned pain into power, touch your heart, then you belong in this community. Subscribe now and don't miss a single story. Leave a like on this video and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that the hardest moments of our lives can become the foundation of our greatest triumphs. On Elena's 40th birthday, Marcus surprised her with a trip back to Chicago. It had been 7 years since they had left, and Elena had not been sure she ever wanted to return. But there was something she needed to do, something she had been putting off for too long. They visited Margaret Chen first. She was 101 years old now, still living in the same small apartment above the old tailor shop, still sharp and witty and full of stories. Elena held her hand and thanked her, really thanked her, for the chance she had given her all those years ago. "You didn't need me," Margaret said, her voice thin but steady. "You had everything you needed inside. Yourself. I just helped you see it." They visited the shop next. Chen and Vasquez, now run entirely by Rosa. It had expanded to 3 locations, employing over 20 people. Elena walked through the familiar rooms, touching the fabric samples, breathing in the scent of steam and thread, feeling the ghost of the woman she used to be. Rosa hugged her tightly. "You should come back," she said. "Visit more often. This place is still yours, you know. It always will be." Elena smiled. "I know. But it's yours now, and you've done incredible things with it." The last stop on their trip was the hardest. They drove to Lincoln Park, to the gates of the Benedetti estate. The house had been sold years ago. Vincent had moved to a smaller place after his mother died, unable to bear the memories that haunted those halls. But the gates were still there, still imposing, still marking the boundary between 2 very different worlds. Elena stood before them, Marcus at her side, and she remembered. She remembered walking through those gates for the first time, feeling small and insignificant and utterly out of place. She remembered the fountain with its marble angels, the gardens with their perfectly arranged roses, the ballroom where she had been publicly humiliated by a woman who saw her as nothing more than a stain to be removed. And she remembered walking out, broken, ashamed, convinced that she would never amount to anything. That woman, the one who had walked out through these gates 11 years ago, felt like a stranger now, a memory from another life. Elena had worked so hard to become someone different, someone stronger, someone who could never be made to feel that small again. But standing here, she realized something she had never understood before. She had not become someone different. She had become more fully herself. The woman who walked into that wedding had been brave enough to show up, even knowing she did not belong. She had been resilient enough to survive a public humiliation that would have destroyed most people. She had been determined enough to rebuild her life from nothing, to create success where others saw only failure. That woman, the poor girl in the borrowed dress, had always been extraordinary. She had just needed time to realize it. Elena reached out and touched the iron gate, feeling the cool metal beneath her fingers. "I'm not angry anymore," she said softly. "I thought I would be coming back here, but I'm not." Marcus stood beside her, silent, giving her the space she needed. "For a long time I hated this place," Elena continued, "hated the people who made me feel worthless, hated myself for letting them. But now—" She paused, searching for the right words. "Now I understand that they gave me a gift, not intentionally. They would have been horrified to know it. But by pushing me out, they forced me to build my own life, on my own terms, and that life turned out to be more beautiful than anything they could have offered me." She stepped back from the gate, turning to face Marcus. "I'm ready to go home now," she said. "Back to San Diego, back to Isabel, back to the life we built together." Marcus took her hand, interlacing his fingers with hers. "Are you okay?" he asked. Eleanor smiled, a smile that held all the pain and joy and complexity of a life fully lived. "I'm better than okay," she said. "I'm free." They walked back to their rental car together, leaving the Benedetti estate behind. The gates grew smaller in the rear-view mirror, shrinking until they were nothing more than a speck on the horizon, and Elena did not look back. The flight home was long, but Elena did not mind. She spent the hours looking out the window, watching the country scroll by beneath her, the patchwork of farms and cities, the rivers and mountains and vast empty spaces that made up the land she had crossed so many times in her life. Marcus was asleep beside her, his head resting against her shoulder. Isabel was at home with a babysitter waiting for their return, and somewhere, In a small apartment in San Diego, a life was waiting for her, a life she had built from nothing, a life that belonged entirely to her. Despised for being poor at a wedding, she had vanished. Without knowing the groom would become one of the most powerful men in the city, without knowing the man who had let her fall would become the love of her life, without knowing that her disappearance would be the beginning of something extraordinary. But, now 11 years later, Elena knew exactly who she was. She was a woman who had been knocked down and gotten back up, a woman who had been told she was worthless and proved them wrong. A woman who had built something beautiful from the ashes of her own humiliation. She was a survivor, a fighter, a builder of dreams, and she was just getting started. As the plane descended toward San Diego, Elena felt a sense of peace settle over her. The wounds of the past had finally healed. The shadows had finally lifted, and the future, bright, uncertain, full of possibility, was hers to claim. She closed her eyes and smiled. The girl who had been despised was gone. In her place was a woman who had learned the most important lesson of all. Your beginning does not determine your end. Your circumstances do not define your worth. And the people who try to make you small are simply mirrors reflecting their own limitations. Rise above them. Build something beautiful. And never, ever let anyone tell you what you cannot become. That is the true meaning of victory. That is the true meaning of freedom. That is the story of Elena Vasquez, the woman who vanished and emerged, reborn, into something extraordinary. And if her story teaches us anything, it is this. The world will try to break you. People will judge you, dismiss you, laugh at you for daring to dream. They will tell you that you do not belong, that you are not good enough, that your place is at the bottom of the ladder, looking up at those who were lucky enough to be born into wealth and privilege. Do not believe them. Do not let their cruelty become your truth. Because you are not defined by what others think of you. You are defined by what you do with the life you have been given, by the choices you make in the face of adversity, by the strength you find when everything seems lost. Elena walked into that wedding with nothing but a borrowed dress and a fragile hope. She walked out broken, humiliated, convinced that she would never amount to anything. And then she built an empire, not of money or power or influence, but of love, of purpose, of self-respect. She built a life that no one could take from her, a family that belonged entirely to her, a legacy that would outlast the sneers and judgments of those who had tried to destroy her. And that is the kind of victory that matters most. So remember her story. Remember Elena Vasquez. Remember the girl who was despised for being poor at a wedding. And remember that she vanished only to return as something far more powerful.